The world is constantly changing. Not only that, the pace of change is getting faster and faster. How do we manage this? How do we create some stability to reduce the amount of stress that we have in our life? How do we do this? How do we adjust? What do we need to do so that we can effectively manage change?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to an On the Couch episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. And we're talking about change and how do we adapt to change? How do we respond? Because change has a massive impact on your ability to deal with life, whether it's to handle your family, whether it's in work, whether it's in with dealing with your friends. Change is constantly happening. We're constantly going through change. And we don't like change, partly because change causes us to feel a loss of control. We feel insecure. We feel stress. When change happens, we're not sure what's going on. We're in a completely new environment, and we're adjusting to that. So we're not sure how to react. Before the change happened, we had a set circumstance, and it might be the case of when you think about it, it might be you're in a job, and let's say you were doing your job and everything was going fine. Then a new boss comes in and says, "Actually, I'm changing the way all this happens, and I'm going to restructure everything." This creates uncertainty, which we feel that loss of control. And we also get stressed because we feel we have concerns about our competence. I mean, when this change happens, how do we adjust to that? How do we change what's going on? How do we know what to do? And how do we know we're going to do the right thing? How do we know we're not going to get fired? It also can create more work. I mean, before the process was, pretty well. It might have been pretty simple. You knew what was going on, you knew what was happening, so you could go through that process. Now you've got to adjust to change, and all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of work that you need to do. You also need to learn new things, which again causes stress. Learning, we're stepping into a new environment. We're learning new skills, and when we learn new skills, we don't always succeed at them straight away, and that can be, well, certainly can be pretty stressful for our ego, and it can cause us to doubt our own competency. And so we don't like, often we don't like to learn new things. And that's partly why I believe that we say children learn faster than adults, when the reality should be the opposite. An adult has much more experience, so they should learn faster. But a child is more open to accepting that change. But it's a topic that's on another podcast. We can also have lack of trust with the decision makers, which can cause a stress. So basically, change causes a huge amount of stress for a number of different reasons, as we've just talked about. Now, really, change means it's all a little bit different, and we do have a need for uncertainty in our life. We like uncertainty, but we like the uncertainty that we like. An example of that is, we like to be surprised on our birthday. So most of us like the idea of, okay, we're having a birthday, nothing's happening, and then we get this surprise party, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. Or someone comes up and says, oh, they surprise us with a present. We like those kind of that kind of uncertainty. We're not sure whether we're going to get a present or not, but when we do get it, oh, that's pretty cool, and we like that. So we like it when people do nice things for us. But on the other side of the coin, one of the other needs that we have is a need for certainty. We need to know that we feel certain about it. And part of that certainty is we feel safe and secure. And this is fairly deep rooted in our own psyche, because this feeling of certainty helped us feel that everything was going to be okay. If we're uncertain about things, it could have led to danger or death, for example, or injury or death. For example, I mean, back in in the cave era, when we're dwelling in caves, humanity was developing, living in caves. I mean, if you were venturing into a dark cave to find food, for example, you could be met with an animal that was in there that might eat you. Or if you're venturing into another area by yourself, you could also, get, you again, an animal could eat you. So this was this uncertainty, this feeling of certainty of knowing what's going on was a feeling of safety, feeling of security. So we have this deeply rooted inside ourselves, in our psyche, that we want this feeling of certainty. We have a need for certainty because we want to feel secure and feel safe. And that's partly where this whole change thing, because we like the uncertainty that we're expecting. As we said, a present on your birthday. I certainly like presents on my birthday, and they make, as much as I might be surprised by that, I like that kind of uncertainty. Now, we live in a changing world, and so what we need to be able to do to successfully navigate the world is actually we need to be a change master. Because as we talked about, life is changing at a much more rapid pace. Certainly, when you look back in history, if you were to go through, and I know this is a fairly obvious statement, but if you were to compare, say, the 1950s to the 60s, they were very different, and the 60s were different from the 70s, and as you move forward, each period was very different. And today, we're in the 2020s, which is significantly different to, say, the 60s. There wasn't internet in the 60s. There wasn't a lot of the things that we have now. I look at my son, for example. Not only does my son not know what a record player is, he doesn't know what a CD player is. He doesn't use a radio. I grew up listening to radio and had a tape deck and VHS videotapes. I'm I am that old, and they were things that I had. But VHS wouldn't be. It's not used today. I mean, even DVDs not used today so much. The streaming services that are available are what is what's available. So it's significantly different. The point is that life will continue to change. And what we need to do if we want to successfully navigate change, we need to thrive on a changing environment. We need to be, rather than looking for this stability that everything's going to be the same and trying to make things stay the same, the change is happening so quickly, and the pace at which it's happening is increasing. We want to, rather than go, okay, how do we find stability? We want to find a way that we can thrive in this changing environment, because we have all experienced change. And we were talking about this a bit earlier. If you are alive, you've experienced change, and that might be the case. I remember, I've had, when I was an employee, I worked in a number of different roles. And I remember getting, the first jobs that I had, it's like I turned up. I remember one time I was working as a chef, and I'd been a chef before I went into this, but it was more a la carte type cooking, and very exquisite. So there was a lot of detail put into the presentation. Even chopping of vegetables, you made sure that they were chopped in the same size, so everything was uniform. And I remember I got this other job as a chef within a big commercial kitchen, and they just didn't have the time for that. I lasted one day because I went in there, and I'm making these things all really uniform and taking my time to make sure it's all right. And the head chef was looking, go, he must. I didn't realize at the time because I thought that was what was expected. And and then you see that they just chopping everything and throwing it in big clumps of things, and I didn't quite understand what was going on. I'm looking, what are they doing? This is weird. And yes, I didn't get called back the next day, but it was one of those things where you went into this environment and I didn't know what was going on. It was completely different. And I think we've all probably had that experience when you've started in a new job, um, and you're dealing with this situation of oh wow, it's pretty, pretty intense. And similar sort of thing when we've also had experiences. I remember I had a car accident when I was, I think I was 20, I would have been probably 19 or 20. And I wasn't insured. My car wasn't insured. And I happened to drive into four cars. There was a concertina effect. I was driving along and some cars had stopped in front of me. I didn't see it, and I drove straight into the back of one of the cars. And concertina, I wrecked four cars. And it was a pretty difficult experience for me. It was very traumatic because I was on the other side of the country. I had no family around me. I had to deal with this situation myself. And the thing was, now when I look back at it, at the time it was really stressful, really difficult. But now when I look back at it, I'm going, wow, that was a pretty good experience. I got to learn so many things. And that's one of the things you want to have a think about, because when you look about it and go, well, how is it possible that you can look back on that same experience? And at the time, it was really stressful, really difficult. But you can look back and go, well, actually, that was probably an experience that was really beneficial to me. And what makes that happen? And how can you do that? And I think part of it is, in the initial time that the experience happens, you don't have the skill to deal with it because you don't know what's going on, which we talked about before. You're in a new situation, you're dealing with this change. And then later, as you go through that process, you learn new skills and you look back and go, wow, actually, I can relate those skills to other areas of my life. And this is when dealing with change, if we look at how the world works, how nature works, it's really interesting because when you look at in nature over history, you'll see that there's a birth, life, and death of pretty much everything. Not just, I mean, if you look at uh, animals, for example, 99.9% of all animals that have existed are extinct. So from the beginning of time on the planet, um, 99% of all planets that have existed are extinct, which is quite a huge number of animals when you think about it, given what's alive today. There's I don't know how many animals, there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of different types of animals. And to think that how many of those are in history have been extinct, and this is part of life. And it's similar sort of thing where you might have take a relationship, for example. Your relationship has a birth, life, and death as well. I mean, you meet someone, you get all excited, then you go through the process of being with them, and some people make it all the way to the end of their life and the relationship ends. Other people, they might break up, so you might go, well, actually, going through a dating phase, you meet someone, you get all excited, you go, actually, I don't really, we're not going to work out that well, and you end the relationship. Business is the same. You have products that that have a birth, life, and death. I mean, and which I mentioned, VHS tapes. VHS tapes had a birth. They came into existence. They were invented and they were marketed and they became quite successful. And then they went through their life, so being sold, and then new technology stepped in and they ceased to exist. So VHS tapes, except for some classic collectors, have effectively died as certainly they're not a mainstream product anymore. And so this is when we look at that, we go, okay, what is this process that we go through for change? And part of this is important to understand how to deal with change. And the first phase, is that initial feeling going, okay, this is the process we're going through when dealing with change. Phase one is birth, phase two is the life, and phase three is death. And so think about that from your perspective of relationships. I know when I've entered into a new relationship, it's all very, very exciting at the beginning. You're like, oh, this is really cool, and all your senses are overwhelmed. And the first time you meet someone, it's like you go, wow, and there's all this buzz and all this excitement. It's like, oh, what do they like, and what do they like this, and you're learning what is right, and what is right, what works, what doesn't work. Do we have this connection? Those kind of things. And then similar when you start a new job, it's the same sort of thing. It's like, oh, who do I report to? Who reports to me? Where's the lunchroom? All those kind of things. What are the breaks? What is the protocol for meetings? All those kind of things happen. And so it's all different, all new, because there's new processes. And then once you start to settle in, that's where phase two starts to happen. This is the life phase. And so we're going along and we're pretty comfortable in the case of a relationship. We know what we like about each other, and we enjoy this time. We know what triggers the other person. So we go, okay, we don't do that. Well, sometimes we do, but to try and make the relationship a lot more harmonious. If you know someone's triggered by something, it's probably a good idea not to do that. In work, if you've got a job, you know what your position is, where you need to be, who you report to, what you need to report, when these things need to be done and ready, those kind of things, so that you go through that process. And same for products within a business. When you look at the products that are available, you report, the product comes into existence, and then it goes through this life phase, and then what happens in a lot of cases, well, in all cases, whatever it is, in phase two, we hit generally what we lovingly call the wall. And this is where things start to not go so well. In a relationship, it's like you might start to get a little bit bored with each other and go, oh, maybe this isn't the right thing. With a product, all of a sudden you might find that competition steps in, and a new product comes out and takes a bit of your market share. So in the job, you might find, okay, I'm a bit getting a bit bored with this now, or the company's has some things have happened, and you're going, well, do I still do this? Do I still report? And it really becomes a challenge at that point. A lot of times when we get to those points, certainly in companies, it's very interesting in how they deal with these times of change. You can look at it and you can see a number of companies, and you've probably all heard this term of going back to basics. And it's like, okay, this is not working anymore. We were doing really well. We've got all these sales. We had all these sales, and now the sales are dropping off. We need to go back to basics and correct what we're doing. And in a relationship, you might do the same thing. You might be thinking about, oh, I need to go back to basics. We need to work out what it was that we had to try and rescue that relationship. And in most cases, it doesn't work. Going back to basics is really the kiss of death. And the reason is, as we talked about before, the times have changed. We don't deal with the things the same way we used to deal with them. So what's happening is you're in this going back to basics. What you're aiming to do is go back and say, okay, it's not working anymore. The environment's changed. Competition has stepped in. What I'm going to do is go back to basics. So if we take VHS tapes, it's like, okay, now they're starting to release DVDs. What did we do to build up those sales initially? That's not going to work. The environment has changed. And what must happen in this situation is the organism, taking nature as an example, the organism must change to the environment. Otherwise, it's most likely to become extinct. For example, using the VHS tapes again, well, the VHS tapes, unless there was a way of providing a better quality and a more usability than DVDs, VHS tapes were probably always going to go extinct because there wasn't a way to adapt to that. But that doesn't mean, from a business perspective, you might be the seller of, VHS tapes, and what you might do is then we'll go, okay, well, we need to adjust what we're doing, and we need to start looking at how we introduce DVDs to our lineup. And this was the case for Blockbuster. When we go look at Blockbuster and Netflix, for example, Netflix always started, as I understand, with the business model that they were going to be streaming service. They were going to send out their media over the internet. Now, they initially started by sending out DVDs via the post, and there's probably a bit more to that there if you want to look up the full detail of it. But they started with that process of, okay, we're going to offer a different service which we think is more convenient for our customers, rather than them having to come out to the video store like they have to do at Blockbuster. We're going to send them the DVDs, which was a start, and then eventually our model is going to change, where as the technology evolves, we'll have the ability to do this via the internet, via a streaming service, which is very common nowadays. There's multiple streaming services available, but back then it was the new thing, and Blockbuster had a huge market share. It was a massive organization, the Blockbusters all around the world, and for them to go back to basics, like, well, how do we serve our customer? How do we build up our market share before? We went, well, we whatever their process was, going back to that's not going to work because the environment has changed. There's new technologies. There's this ability to stream, and Blockbuster had all of that customer base. Had it adapted to that change and adapted to the environment, it could have been the leader in that. A great example of that adaptation to change would be the rail industry. Going back to when the rail industry was at its peak, when you look at the game Monopoly, the train lines that are in there were actually real train lines that existed real, and what they didn't do is, as things move forward, the trains, they owned the market. The trains, the big train lines, they owned the entire transport business. But what they did was their focus was they're in the rail business, and they didn't think beyond that they're actually in the transport business. So when Henry Ford come along with his trucks and started being more efficient with the way that things could be delivered, because when you think about it, rail is pretty limited in where you can deliver to. You can deliver to the rail, and then you've got to find another to the station along the rail, but the train can't go off the rail. And so then, as motor transport vehicles such as cars and trucks and vans became more capable of making these deliveries and more available to the public, all of a sudden the train line started to lose market share. Now, had the train line, because they had massive amount of income and wealth, had they started, they could have bought Ford Motor Company several times over, but they didn't. They didn't recognize the change. They might have seen some of the change happening. They might have gone back to basics. How do we do this? And then they ended up dying. And a lot of those major train lines went out of business. And transport then changed through to trucks, and then we've actually moved transport still largely by trucks, but it also moved into the airline industry as well. Had the train companies bought up the trucks or moved into trucking as well, and then moved into air freight and even ship freight, they would have owned the market if they had have evolved to that. And that's where going back to basics is really, it is a kiss of death, because it's kind of like saying, I mean, use it in your relationship, for example. How many people, if you related to your spouse the way your parents related to each other or your grandparents related to each other, it wouldn't be very effective. It wouldn't work in today's environment. So if you've got a relationship problem and go, oh, okay, I've got a relationship problem, I'll look at how did my parents deal with this. Chances are it's probably not going to be very helpful to you. And this is where it's important when we're looking at, and when we're looking at this situation of we've hit the wall. What do we do? How do we deal with that? Well, that's where what we want to do is not so much go back to basics, but we want to understand the environment we're in. We want to look at, okay, how do we adjust? How do we transform? How do we adjust to the environment? What do we do differently now so that we can actually behave differently to the environment? So, and we talked about that with the business side of things. You go, well, okay, the Netflix blockbuster is a great example. We go, okay, there's Netflix is starting to send videos or DVDs out to the customers. Well, how do we adjust to that? We can do that. There's this thing called the internet. Is there a way we can use that? Or what can we do now to achieve our objective? And similar sort of thing with a relationship. It's like, well, what is your objective in the relationship? Are you looking to have a harmonious relationship? How do you adjust to what's going on? It might be, I mean, a big change that couples go through is having children. That really changes the way, changes the dynamic. And certainly, there's a lot of research on this that it certainly affects the guy in the relationship, because the guy generally gets a lot of attention. Well, we should say, he loses a lot of attention when kids come along, because all of a sudden the wife is looking after the kids and he's not getting the attention that he was getting before. And so how does he adjust to that environment? How do we keep that? And also too, with the kids side of things, when you have children come along, they take a lot of time, take a lot of energy. We don't have the same energy that we had before, and all of a sudden we're tired at the end of the day. So when it comes to things like, some intimacy at the end of the day, we're both feeling really tired, and all of a sudden without that intimacy, we start, losing a bit of the passion, and all of a sudden we're going, well, what happened? What happened to our relationship? It was so loving, and we had so much fun all the time, and we don't make the necessary adjustments to the environment. Going, okay, we've got kids, we've got all these things going on. We need to adjust how we're doing things, and this often happens too. I mean, it's quite common in that relationship space where it will go the situation is generally, oh, the woman's not interested in sex anymore. It's generally more so to do with energy rather than not interested, because it's like the biology stays the same. And also too, as we move forward, what usually happens is after the children move on, then all of a sudden that drive comes back. But by that time the relationship's ended, or some other things have got in the way, and it becomes a difficult situation. Whereas if we adapt to the change and we go, okay, we've got kids now, how do we do this? How do we manage it in a way that we can keep that passion alive? And it's not difficult. And won't get into that in detail in this podcast, but we've got other podcasts where we address how to manage that and some techniques. Because it's most things in life are fairly simple. We overcomplicate it, and maintaining the passion in a relationship is something that's fairly easy as well. And this is where we're coming back to, okay, we need to adjust. We don't want to go back to basics. What we need to do is look at, okay, what is the environment we're in? How do we adjust and change so that we can go and become the butterfly, so to speak? So the environment's changed. We need to evolve into something new so that we can respond differently in the environment we're in. And this is where it's really important in today's environment, not so much to find stability in your life, not so much to try and fall, because the change is going to happen. And if we're constantly fighting to create this stability, it's going to create a huge amount of stress. It's going to be very tiring as well. Fighting against change well, fighting against anything is exhausting. And fighting against change, something that's going to happen, trying to maintain it's the same responses to a changing world is really, really difficult. And what we want to be doing is this life is good phase that we've had, where we just, oh, relax, this is really cool, understand how everything's going on, has got much shorter. So what we need to do is be able to embrace this chaos, this confusion, the times of flux, because they're more frequent now. What we need is the skills of going, okay, what's going on? What do I want or what do I choose is more important. Asking yourself, what do I choose? Well, I want a passionate relationship. So to have a passionate relationship, what do we need to do as a couple? And it's a case of, all right, we've got kids, we need to manage that. We need to schedule that. A number of people that I know, they schedule, not only do they schedule date night, they schedule sex night. They go, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to create an environment where it's us, and we're going to have this time, and we're going to make it romantic or whatever it needs to be, so that both people are in the mood. And they actually schedule it and do that way, because they understand that how their environment is different. They understand what are the things that they have to deal with, but most of all, they understand what it is they choose for themselves. They know what they're trying to achieve. They've set that. And similar in business, what are you choosing to achieve? What are the objectives? And I've got that on my website, damienandrews.com. There's a free downloadable which helps you set out for both your personal and business life. What are the things you're trying to achieve in three key areas. For personal, it's, what is your monetary goals, the things that you want to achieve? What are the learning and development goals that you want to achieve, and what are the fun goals? And in business, we're dealing with, again, financial, you're dealing with culture, and you're dealing with operations. And they're the three categories. You set clear goals in those three categories, whether it's your personal or business, you're going to have a lot of success a lot easier. So that's really where we're at with this whole process of trying to make change not happen, to try and create stability. You're fighting against the inevitable. Change happens. The world will constantly change. Not only that, the rate of change is increasing. So what you need to be able to do is be in a position to be comfortable with flux, and in a way of adjusting yourself to the environment you find yourself in.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.